HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Science of Weird Shit: Why Our Minds Conjure the Paranormal by Chris French. Foreword by Richard Wiseman. Read by Michael Langan. Foreword. I have always been skeptical. Indeed, when I was 7 years old, I had a sneaking suspicion that I was 8. During my teenage years, I became fascinated by seemingly paranormal phenomena, but always preferred the debunk to the bunk. As a result, I spent many happy hours reading books that explored the science behind the supernatural, including titles such as UFOs Explained, Nostradamus Exposed, and All of Your Dreams Are Meaningless. In my 20s, I obtained a degree in behavioral science, completed a doctorate on the psychology of the paranormal, and started to conduct my own research into the unexplained. Time and again, I discovered that seemingly extraordinary phenomena had perfectly ordinary explanations, and it therefore came as quite a shock when, in my mid-30s, I found myself regularly coming face to face with the devil. The encounters always happened in the middle of the night when I was fast asleep, and involved me suddenly sitting upright in my bed with my eyes wide open and my palms sweating profusely. Each time, I was convinced that Mr. Splitfoot had somehow found his way into my bedroom, and that he was now standing 10 feet away from my bed with his red eyes staring straight at me. I can easily see how the scary experience could cause a believer in demonic entities to contact their local exorcist, to carry out magical rituals in an effort to protect themselves from the Prince of Darkness, or, at the very least, to shit themselves. However, as a lifelong disbeliever, I decided to discover if there might be a more scientific explanation for my nightly encounters. A few hours searching the internet revealed that I was experiencing a strange but surprisingly common sleep disorder known as a night terror. The internet also offered a range of opinions about the causes of these experiences, with the smart money being split between falling asleep feeling anxious, having an overly warm bedroom, and positioning your wardrobe perilously close to a portal into the underworld. Chris French has also spent much of his career studying weird phenomena. Like me, he has jettisoned his Ouija board and dowsing rods in favor of a more rational and scientific approach to the topic. I have known Chris for over 20 years, and I can think of no better traveling companion to guide you through the heady world of the paranormal. We first met in a coffee shop in central London. Neither of us knew that the other one was going to be there, so the meeting was a lovely coincidence. I recognized Chris as soon as he walked in and intuitively knew that he would order a large decaf latte with sprinkles. When he saw me, he levitated over with blood pouring from stigmata on his hands and feet, and the two of us chatted about our shared skepticism for matters paranormal. More seriously, I have always admired Chris's ability to befriend both believers and skeptics alike, to boldly go where few scientists have gone before, and have a good time going there. In this book, he will introduce you to a wide range of seemingly paranormal phenomena, including ghosts, out-of-body experiences, reincarnation, déjà vu, mediumship, hauntings, alien abductions, and déjà vu. In each instance, a lesser scientist might be tempted to adopt a cynical attitude, and to argue that investigating such outlandish and weird phenomena is a waste of time. However, like a modern-day Charles Fort, Chris convincingly demonstrates that there is much to be gained from spending time at the fringes of science, from studying anomalies, and from taking the road less traveled. Time and again, Chris's adventures into the unknown deepen our scientific understanding of the human mind and provide important insights into the psychology of attention, perception, memory, and much more. And, unlike the authors of many other books in this genre, Chris isn't an outside observer reporting the work of others. Instead, he has been there, done that, and got the bent spoon to prove it. The benefit of Chris's sojourns into the supernatural go beyond science. A large percentage of the public is fascinated with the strange, the mysterious, and the uncanny. As a result, documentary makers and journalists frequently produce television programs and films about the topic. Alas, all too often, these outpourings are aimed at those who believe in such phenomena, with skeptics struggling to make their voices heard. Chris has repeatedly fought the good fight and frequently appeared on these programs as the, often solitary, voice of rationality. This book describes his behind-the-scenes experiences and presents a fascinating and eye-opening account of how such shows are conceived, filmed, and edited. Finally, the book also provides a rare insight into how science works. Many years ago, Sue Blackmore, who influenced the thinking and careers of both Chris and myself, wrote a wonderful autobiography describing her journey from paranormal believer to skeptic. Much of her book describes how scientists actually design and carry out their research, as opposed to the rather sanitized and sterile accounts often presented in academic papers and talks. Chris's book is full of equally valuable insights and will be of great interest to anyone wanting to know what it's really like to work as a psychologist. Often chatty, it describes the origin story behind several studies, including a lovely anecdote about how a chance observation by his daughter led to one of his most influential papers, and offers fascinating descriptions of the trials and tribulations of trying to carry out research in this tricky area. The time has come for me to hand you over to my old pal and trusted colleague, Chris French. Regardless of whether you are a firm believer in the paranormal, a staunch skeptic, or an undecided waverer, I know that you are going to have a great time. Some say that the truth is out there, but in my opinion, it's in here. Enjoy. Richard Wiseman, Professor, University of Hertfordshire. Preface. In the beginning. The paranormal has always fascinated me. When I was a child, it also terrified me, especially the idea of ghosts. Indeed, it was not until fairly late in my childhood, maybe at the age of 10 or 11, that I was able to sleep on my own without a nightlight. Despite the terror that thoughts of spooks and bogeymen could often ignite in my childish imagination, my fascination for the paranormal would tempt me to read scary short stories or watch spooky TV programs. Activities that I sincerely regretted later as I lay awake in my bed trying to get to sleep, listening out for any noise that might indicate an unwelcome nocturnal visitor. In my teenage years, my interest in the paranormal widened, and my fear of ghosts subsided somewhat. I became interested in many other aspects of the paranormal, particularly the books of Erich von Däniken, who argued that evidence strongly supported the idea that our planet had been repeatedly visited in the past by advanced alien civilizations. As a curious and somewhat nerdy teenager, I was totally taken in by von Däniken's arguments and evidence. I naively believed that it must be true, because it was written in a book. I was somewhat surprised that many people did not find von Däniken's ideas as fascinating and mind-blowing as I did. Having said that, clearly enough people shared my perspective to ensure that his books sold in the millions. It was not until many years later that I came across critiques such as Ronald Story's The Space Gods Revealed, a close look at the theories of Erich von Däniken, and fully appreciated how shoddy von Däniken's arguments were and how frankly dishonest his presentation of evidence was. Another memorable moment in my gullible teenage years was the appearance on British TV screens in 1973 of a certain Uri Geller. Geller appeared to have amazing psychic abilities. He could apparently read minds, divine the contents of sealed envelopes, fix broken watches with the power of his mind, and most notably of all, bend metal objects such as forks and spoons merely by gently stroking them. From the outset, some scientists, including British physicists John Taylor and John Hasted, endorsed Geller as having genuine paranormal ability, although Taylor subsequently changed his mind. At the time, I, too, was totally convinced of Geller's powers. I so wanted him to be genuine. In 1974, I went to Manchester University to study for a BSc in psychology. The topics covered in this book were rarely, if ever, covered as part of my undergraduate degree. After graduating in 1977 and working for a short period as a research assistant at the University of Bangor in North Wales, I embarked on a period of postgraduate research at the University of Leicester under the supervision of Dr. J. Graham Beaumont. My PhD was not in the area of anomalistic psychology. Indeed, I had never heard of anomalistic psychology at that time, not least because the term had yet to be invented. Instead, my research used electroencephalography, EEG, in a largely unsuccessful attempt to study the function and anatomy of the cerebral hemispheres of the human brain. The turning point. I can remember fairly precisely when I stopped believing in the paranormal, and what caused me to do so. After I completed my postgraduate research, I took up a one-year post as a lecturer at Coventry Polytechnic, now Coventry University. As I recall, it was during this period that a friend recommended to me a newly published book called Parapsychology, Science or Magic, by Canadian social psychologist James Alcock. It was the first detailed academic critique of parapsychology that I had ever come across. It also put forward plausible, non-paranormal explanations for a range of ostensibly paranormal experiences. As my friend had suspected, I loved the book, but I had no idea how massive a role it would play in my life. It opened the door to a whole new world of skepticism that I had never suspected existed. Back then, just like today, there were vastly more uncritical pro-paranormal books, articles and TV and radio programs than skeptical treatments of the paranormal. If anything, the situation was even more biased in favor of paranormal claims than it is today. However, it turned out that there was some skeptical literature out there, if only you knew where to find it. I noticed lots of references in Alcock's book to a publication called The Skeptical Inquirer. I cannot now remember how I did so, but I managed to track down Mike Hutchinson, the UK distributor for this American magazine, and take out a subscription. When an issue arrived, I would eagerly read it from cover to cover. Some early influences. Alcock's book also made me aware of the work of James, the amazing, Randi. Many listeners will no doubt already be aware of this larger-than-life individual, but I confess that back then, in the early 1980s, I was not. I now know that if skeptics were allowed to have patron saints, which, of course, we're not, James Randi would probably occupy that role. Randi truly lived up to the word amazing in his stage name. During his long career, he had, for example, performed as a conjurer in a carnival roadshow and subsequently in many countries around the world, written an astrology column under the pseudonym of Zoran for a Canadian tabloid. He did this by simply shuffling astrology items from other newspapers and randomly pasting them into his column. Escaped from safes and prison cells on numerous occasions, remained submerged in a sealed metal coffin in a swimming pool for 104 minutes, appeared in and hosted numerous radio and TV programs, performed as both a mad dentist and executioner on Alice Cooper's $1 Billion Babies tour, and escaped from a straitjacket while suspended by his feet above Niagara Falls. Anyone who would not describe such a career as amazing is in serious need of a good dictionary. But it is not for achievements such as these that Randi is held in such high esteem within the world of skepticism. Born in 1928, Randi retired as a performing conjurer at the age of 60, having achieved international recognition for his skills in that domain. But by this time, he had also achieved recognition as a skeptical investigator of paranormal claims. He first came to prominence in this role back in the early 1970s when a certain Uri Geller was the focus of the world's media with his sensational claims of amazing paranormal abilities. Randi challenged these claims, accusing Geller of being a fraud and a charlatan He used nothing more than standard conjuring techniques to achieve his effects. I have a vague memory, which may or may not be a false memory, of seeing Randy on television at this time, demonstrating Geller's most famous feat of apparently bending a piece of cutlery, often to the point where the bowl of the spoon would become detached from the stem just by gently stroking it. While not revealing how it was done, Randy insisted it was simply a magic trick. At that tender age, I saw Randy's performance as entirely irrelevant. Okay, so you can do something as a magic trick that looked the same as what Geller was doing, but Yuri wasn't doing a magic trick, was he? He was using his psychic powers to achieve the effect. Dumb or what? I now have quite a few friends who are professional conjurers, and as they point out, if Yuri really is using psychic powers to achieve the effect, he's doing it the hard way. It really looks exactly the same when done as a magic trick. It should be noted that Geller has never managed to successfully perform this allegedly psychic feat under properly controlled conditions that would rule out the possibility of achieving the effects through the use of conjuring techniques. As I look back some 4 decades or so, I can now more fully appreciate the influence that a number of other skeptics had on my own thinking, even though I was not so aware of it at the time. I can no longer remember where or when I met most of them, or even the order in which I met them, but each made an impression in their own way. Prominent among them would be Dr. Susan Blackmore. Sue was certainly the most recognized and well-informed skeptic on the UK scene when I first became aware of her back in the 1980s. Extroverted and articulate, she often appeared on TV presenting the skeptical perspective on a range of ostensibly paranormal phenomena, sometimes with her hair dyed 3 different colors. Like me, Sue had been a strong believer in the paranormal for many years before embarking on her own parapsychological research, in her case at the University of Surrey. Her belief in the paranormal had been reinforced by a profound out-of-body experience, OBE, she had had as a student in Oxford in 1970, brought on by a combination of tiredness and mind-altering substances. She began her PhD research at Surrey convinced that she could produce strong scientific evidence to prove the existence of extrasensory perception, ESP, despite the general skepticism of the wider scientific community. Several years later, after expending much time and effort on this quest, she ended up as a vocal skeptic. The fact that she arrived at this skeptical position after years of research in the area was pretty compelling evidence to me that maybe ESP did not exist after all. It was also around this time that I met Richard Wiseman. In contrast to Sue and myself, Richard had never been a believer in the paranormal, but had always been fascinated by paranormal claims. His other obsession growing up was conjuring, which may go some way toward explaining why he was always skeptical about the paranormal. He is now a member of the Inner Magic Circle, although he decided that a career as a professional conjurer was not for him, and instead registered for a degree in psychology at University College London. If my memory is correct, I met Richard shortly after he had completed his PhD at the University of Edinburgh, under the supervision of the first holder of the Kerstler Chair in Parapsychology, the late Professor Robert Morris. Richard is currently the holder of the UK's only chair in the Public Understanding of Psychology, at the University of Hertfordshire, and is one of the most recognisable British psychologists today. Not only is he an extremely gifted communicator of science, often appearing in the media, but he is also very, very funny. He has over 130,000 followers on Twitter. I just checked. His books have sold over 3 million copies, and he has been described by Elizabeth Loftus, past president, Association for Psychological Science, as one of the world's most creative psychologists. Not surprisingly, I hate him. Joking. He's actually one of my favorite people to hang out with. As I began attending skeptics' conferences, I was also lucky enough to meet Professor Ray Hyman, an American psychologist whose writings I was already familiar with. Ray is respected by those on both sides of the debate regarding the existence of paranormal abilities, because his criticisms of parapsychology, like Jim Alcock's, are based on a detailed knowledge of the field, in contrast to the superficial and ill-informed dismissal that, unfortunately, is all too common among some skeptics. I confess I was somewhat in awe of Ray, but he turned out to be one of the friendliest people you could hope to meet. Ray was a founding member of a group called the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal, back in 1976. CSI-COP is usually pronounced PsyCop, which seems appropriate given that psi is often used as a general term to collectively refer to all types of paranormal ability. The group was founded in response to what was perceived to be an upsurge in interest in the paranormal in the United States at that time. Other founding members included Paul Kurtz, Martin Gardner, James Randi, Carl Sagan, and Isaac Asimov. As well as publishing The Skeptical Inquirer and organizing skeptics' conferences, PsyCop members often provided skeptical commentary on paranormal claims in the media. In 2006, PsyCop changed its name to the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, CSI, not to be confused with the TV program of the same name. This name change came about partly because it made clear that the paranormal was, even in those early days, only one area of interest to PsyCop. In the words of Kendrick Frazier, editor of The Skeptical Inquirer, "Our underlying interest has never been the paranormal, per se, but larger topics and issues such as how our beliefs in such things arise, how our minds work to deceive us, how we think, how our critical thinking capabilities can be improved, what are the answers to certain uninvestigated mysteries, what damage is caused by uncritical acceptance of untested claims, how critical attitudes and scientific thinking can be better taught, how good science can be encouraged and bad science exposed, and so on and on." Moving on. After I completed my contract at Coventry Polytechnic, I was fortunate enough to take up a 2-year post back at Leicester University, working on a project on automated assessment for my former supervisor, Dr. Beaumont. Next, I worked for a year as a research fellow in the Psychometric Research Unit at Hatfield Polytechnic, now the University of Hertfordshire. Although I believe that psychological tests can be useful, the idea of spending the rest of my academic career as a psychometrician did not set my heart pounding. For me, it is not one of the most exciting areas of psychology. And so it was with great relief and gratitude that, in 1985, I accepted the offer of a permanent lectureship at Goldsmiths College, University of London. At this point, my interest in skepticism was still more a hobby than a serious research interest. But I did feel I knew enough to contribute a 2-hour lecture critically assessing parapsychology to a module on theoretical issues as part of our BSc Honours Psychology program. The students appeared to enjoy the lecture, and I continued to give it once a year for the following few years. In 1990, I presented a paper on cognitive biases associated with paranormal belief at the British Psychological Society's, BPS, annual conference in Swansea. 2 years later, I published a version of that paper in The Psychologist, the BPS's monthly magazine. This was the same year that I published my first empirical paper on paranormal belief. You may have missed it. It was in the Australian Journal of Psychology. Thus, I took my first tentative steps as a researcher in anomalistic psychology. In 1994, I realized that I knew enough to put on a whole module on anomalistic psychology as an option for our final year BSc students. Originally, I gave my module the title Psychology, Parapsychology and Pseudoscience. Much later, I revised the syllabus and gave it the title Anomalistic Psychology. It proved to be very popular with the students, and I thoroughly enjoyed teaching it. As you might guess from the title, although many of the lectures did cover paranormal topics, I also wanted to be able to cover additional topics such as homeopathy, cold fusion, and N-rays. Over the next few years, I published a few more papers in the field of anomalistic psychology, but I was aware of the fact that my interest in the weird stuff was only tolerated by my then head of department, not actively encouraged. I was pretty much explicitly told that I could carry on publishing the occasional paper on paranormal belief and related topics, so long as I mainly published in more academically respectable areas. I meekly did what I was told and continued to publish on more conventional topics, such as the relationship between cognition and emotion and the functions of the cerebral hemispheres, as well as in the area of anomalistic psychology. With the benefit of hindsight, I wish I had been more courageous and just concentrated on the area that interested me the most. Although the more conventional topics that I was researching were genuinely interesting and important, they did not hold the same fascination as the paranormal. Furthermore, whereas many dozens of researchers all around the world were engaged in investigating these more mainstream topics, there were only a few active researchers in anomalistic psychology. The idea of being a big fish in a small pool, as opposed to an average-sized fish in an ocean, certainly had an appeal, and I was already more widely known for my weird research than for my more conventional stuff, despite, at that stage, having published relatively little in the area. Furthermore, people like Susan Blackmore and Richard Wiseman were living proof that it was possible to have a, more or less, respectable academic career in the area. Back in those days, it was quite common for academic colleagues to view research in anomalistic psychology as being pretty much a waste of time. After all, they would say, we all know that ghosts don't exist. We all know that ESP isn't real. We all know that people aren't really being abducted by aliens. So why are you interested in this stuff? This always seemed to me to be rather missing the point. As discussed further in Chapter 1, most non-scientists do believe in the paranormal, and a sizable minority of the population claim to have personally had paranormal experiences. Furthermore, such beliefs and experiences have always been reported throughout history in all known societies. Clearly, they are part of what it means to be human. Their ubiquity might indicate that paranormal phenomena really do exist. If so, the wider scientific community should study them in the same way that scientists investigate other natural phenomena. But if, in fact, psi does not exist, then we can learn a great deal about human psychology by investigating the factors underlying experiences that appear to be paranormal, even though they are not. At least 2 types of skepticism. In most situations, humans prefer simplicity over complexity. We all have a natural tendency to perceive and think about the world around us in simple binary terms, such as good versus bad, right versus wrong, us versus them. This is understandable. It makes decision-making much easier if we can immediately see the correct course of action in any given situation. The only snag is that the world around us is, in reality, complex and nuanced. As Algernon Moncrief, a character in Oscar Wilde's play The Importance of Being Earnest, famously said, "The truth is rarely pure and never simple." Looking back now at some of the views I held about the paranormal when I first discovered the joys of skepticism, I am very much aware that I was the victim of such black and white thinking. For example, I would pretty much have agreed with all of the following statements. Most, if not all, people who claim to be psychic, as well as astrologers, tarot card readers, practitioners of alternative medicine, and so on, are deliberate frauds, knowingly deceiving their clients for monetary gain or else suffering from some sort of psychopathology. Most, if not all, people who claim to have personally experienced the paranormal are either stupid, lying, or suffering from some sort of psychopathology. Most, if not all, experimental parapsychologists are either incompetent when it comes to experimental design and statistical analysis, or knowingly fraudulent. I would not endorse any of those views now. Having said that, there is certainly a grain of truth in each. The history of psychical research is indeed littered with examples of frauds claiming to possess paranormal abilities, and there are many.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?